Hey everybody, Josh Searton of World Alternative Media here, and we are joined once again by Juanita Broaddrick, a survivor of rape at the hands of Bill Clinton, author of the new book, You'd Better Put Some Ice on That, which we'll put a link for below, and it's a #1 bestseller on Amazon, and an altogether brave and genuine human being. Thank you for joining us, Juanita.
Oh, Josh, it's really nice to be with you.
Now, we're not going to get you to go over everything that's happened again. I can imagine you've gone over it a million times in your life. But for those that, but for those who are new to this story, could you just do a brief overview of what happened in that hotel in the 1970s in Arkansas?
Sure. Josh, I was working in the campaign to elect President Clinton as governor of the state of Arkansas. And I had the misfortune of meeting him in Little Rock. Well, I didn't meet him. I went down for a seminar, and I tried to meet him at his campaign headquarters to talk over business about my nursing home. And it finally worked its way around that he told me that we would meet in the coffee shop down in the hotel coffee shop. And I told my nurse, I said, you go on to the seminar, and as soon as I'm through in the coffee shop, I'll be right there. And so when he came to the hotel, he said, he called my room, and he said, you know, it's so crowded down here, and reporters, can we just have coffee in your room and talk about this? And, of course, you're talking 40 years ago, but I know I was a little bit alarmed. But Bill Clinton was the Attorney General, and I know at that time I didn't have any fear. And as everyone may or may not know, he came to my room, and we began to talk. I began to get my information out. And then things went from bad to worse. I told the man no. I told him that I was married, but I also had other things going on in my life. And he would not take no for an answer. It was a horrific rape.
Oh, it's absolutely just disgusting. And, you know, this is a man who has been a champion of so-called women's rights. It's just laughable. But going into that, what got you to release your book? Because, of course, it's called You Better Put Some Ice on That. And, of course, that's something that Clinton told you as you left the room after biting your lip open, from what I've heard in the past. So what got you to actually buckle down and actually write this book talking about such a horrific experience?
Right, and I'll go into that just a little bit here. Whenever the rape was over and Bill Clinton was going to the door to leave, he motioned to me. He motioned to my lip, which was bleeding and already swollen twice the size from him biting on it to keep me quiet. And he motioned and he said, you better put some ice on that. And then about 30 minutes later, my nurse, I hadn't showed up at the meeting, so she came to the room and found me in that condition. And I think that's important, you know, for people to know that I'm not just saying this happened on my own. I was found by my friend and my nurse in this horrible condition.
And, of course, you have just recently released this book, and it goes into this story a lot. Can you just go into what got you to write this book?
Sure. Josh, I sat down about a year ago for a 2-month period after I came back from President Trump's inauguration. I thought, you know, I need to sit down and sort of document things in my life with dates and events and what has happened to me. And I just did this for my family. And I did all this. I put it on my computer, and then I forgot about it. Then about 4 months ago, I had a phone call from a young investigative reporter out of Jacksonville, Florida. And he was wanting to do like a serialized documentary. And, you know, I thought, well, you know, I wouldn't mind doing that. I think it will let a lot of the millennials and people that aren't aware of my situation know more about what happened to me. So I said, you know, I've written sort of like a journal of my life. And I said, I'll send that to you. Well, about 2 days later, he said, we don't need to do a documentary. We need to do a book. So it's just a book in my own words of my life being abused by my mom, and how the most of my life has been trying to get over being raped by a man who became president of the United States.
Absolutely. And, you know, a lot of rape survivors, you don't like the word victim, I believe. You like survivor over victim because, of course, you are a survivor and you've had to live with this. But most rape survivors, they do whatever they can to get the memory out of their head. They try to avoid the memory to the best of their ability. And you've had to live with this on such a regular basis, almost every day of the year, it seems like. This is a big story in the news, especially in independent media. A few mainstream medias have picked it up in recent times. But you've had to live with this memory over and over and over again. How do you live with having to deal with this so much all the time and having the spotlight on it?
Well, Josh, it's been so difficult. I would never have come out. And I have to be truthful about that. Had I not been outed by the Paula Jones lawsuit, I was irate, I was upset, and I went to my attorney and said, get me out of this. I will not be a part of that lawsuit. I thought it was, you know, at the time I thought it was frivolous. I didn't know really what had happened to her. But there was no way I was going to allow another individual to pull me into a lawsuit and make me tell things that I never wanted to tell. And I never really came forward until I was subpoenaed by the Ken Starr impeachment committee. And just before that happened, my son, who's an attorney, came to me. He had known since he was a teenager, probably 18, I believe, what had happened to me. And he came to me and he said, Mom, Paula Jones' case was civil. He said, Ken Starr is federal. He said, you've got to talk about this. You've got to tell them the truth. And I told him, I said, I can't, Kevin. I just can't talk about it. And he said, well, at this point in your life, you have to. So that's how I came out and told Ken Starr what had happened to me.
Well, there were quite a few witnesses, especially in the case where, well, you mentioned the nurse, but then there was also Bill Clinton attempting to allegedly apologize to you before he ran for president. Could you go into that briefly?
Well, sure. It was in 1991. Well, let me go back just a little bit. In 1984, you say, how do you get over something like this? After that rape, to try to forget, I completely threw myself into my businesses, and I worked hard. I worked 10, 14 hours a day most days, and it was just a process for me to try to forget. Well, in 1984, my nursing home here in my hometown was named the best nursing home in the state, and I received this letter, and it's a congratulatory letter from the state, from the governor's office, congratulating me on the accomplishment. But then across the bottom is scrawled in Bill Clinton's handwriting, and it says, I admire you very much, Bill. That was the first contact I had had with him at all. And to me, it said, thank you for being quiet. That's why I admire you. And then on in 1991, I was at a seminar with the same nurse. She still worked for me. And we were inside the meeting, and someone comes to the door and says that I'm wanted in the hallway. So I immediately get up and go out there. When I get there, the man motions down around by the elevator around the corner. So I walk down there, and my nurses followed me out. I had two nurses with me, Norma Rogers and her sister, Jean Darden. And as I go around the corner, there stands Bill Clinton. And he comes right over to me, and I start to back up. I mean, that's the first time I've been face-to-face with that man since the rape, and it was frightening to me. And he comes over to me, and he starts apologizing for what had happened back in that hotel room in 1978, and making such bizarre statements that he's a changed man, he's a family man, and he's so sorry for what he did. And listen, it's a wonder I didn't faint. But I just stood there for a minute, and then I looked at him and I said, you go to hell, and I walked off.
No, it's good for you, and yeah, people around you had seen this this happen, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Well,
They
okay.
didn't know. They didn't know the conversation, but they saw me standing there with him.
Absolutely, and of course, yeah, he went and ran for president right after that. It's no
Right.
surprise there, and of course, I think a lot of people have to understand, Juanita, that back in the 1970s, 80s, even to a large extent in the 90s, women who've been raped. It's not easy for women to come out and admit that because so often they are seen as the people that are in the wrong, that they've done something wrong. Is that correct?
Oh yes, back in the 70s, it was men will be men, just deal with it. And Josh, we did. We dealt with it. We dealt with this obscene behavior from men, and that's why they got away with it. It's because we didn't accept it, but we dealt with it, and that went on, for many years, as you know.
Well, that brings me to my next point, which is this women's march that we see. So we see all these women going to Washington, D.C. to protest Trump. They have female genitalia on their head, which is like something out of the Twilight Zone. And they're marching in Washington claiming that they stand for all women. But then any woman that doesn't agree with their political viewpoint, they throw under the bus, basically. They've ignored your case entirely. What do you think of this movement that's going on in Washington for so-called women's rights when they don't seem to care about you because, well, maybe you aren't benefiting their preconceived points of view?
Well, I think this is absolutely has nothing to do with women's rights and them wearing female genitalia on their head, which is the most ridiculous thing they could possibly do. I think it's a march against Trump. I think these are liberal women that want nothing to do with the current administration, and they're covering it as a movement for women. That's not what it is, Josh, and I think everyone pretty well knows that. They spew this vile, contemptible language and have their children with them. It's obscene.
Well, you see topless women with children. There's so many things wrong with it. There's nothing sacred anymore, it seems. But with that said, of course, Hillary Clinton has been a supporter of this women's march, and Hillary Clinton has claimed for years to stand up for women. We all know what happened with you, with Paula Jones. We've seen the threats against Monica Lewinsky, etc. Well, could you go into Hillary Clinton threatened you, and I think a lot of people need to acknowledge this. This person that apparently stands for women's rights threatened a victim.
Right, and it was only about 3 weeks after the rape. I had removed myself from volunteering, but after the rape, I told them I couldn't volunteer anymore. My business was taking too much of my time. But before the rape, I had arranged for a fundraiser at my friend's home. They had a beautiful home here in Van Buren, and we had arranged, and I had asked them to have it there. I played tennis with the lady, and her husband was my dentist, so I was very close to him. So I told them that I wouldn't attend the fundraiser, but I would come up, help get set up, and bring them some information that they needed. So I planned to run up there before the Clintons got there and leave. I did not want to see them. But before I could get out the door, it must have been about 15 minutes before the fundraiser began, here come the Clintons in the back door. And I'm trying to make my way to the front door. And about that time, my friend comes up to me. He was a local pharmacist here, Charles Watts, and he was the one that drove them from the airport. And he comes over to me, Josh, and he says, I just had to tell you that the topic of the conversation all the way from the airport was about you. And I froze. I thought, I have got to get out of here. And then about that time, I see Betty, my friend, standing in the kitchen with Hillary Clinton, and they're pointing to me. And here comes Hillary Clinton straight for me. I didn't see Bill Clinton, which way he went. But here comes Hillary. And I have to tell you, at that moment, I thought, here comes that poor woman that's married to that monster. And as she walked to me, I thought, How am I going to handle this? And I felt sorry for her. And she rushes over to me. She takes my hand. And she says, I'm just so happy to meet you. She says, I just want you to know how appreciative that Bill and I are for everything you do in his campaign. And I don't know if I nodded or said thank you before I turned to walk away, just to get out of there. But as I turned to walk away, I feel somebody grab a hold of my arm from behind. And I thought it was somebody going to tell me goodbye. But as I turn around, I see it's Hillary Clinton. And that smile of hers has faded to this very angry scowl. There's no other way you can describe it. And she pulls me close to her, and she says, do you understand everything you do? I knew that was a threat. And no matter what anybody says on the left, or Andrea Mitchell, who says, how do you know that's what she meant? You would have to have been standing where I was and received that comment the way that I did. I knew exactly what she meant. And I jerked my arm from her grip, and I left.
Just despicable. Just it's unbelievable. Every time I hear the story, Juanita, it just makes me angry and makes me want to see some form of justice done about this, because it's good to get the word out, but this so badly needs to hit the mainstream 24/7. I've seen recently on Fox News, you've been on frequently. At least there is a push to get that message into the mainstream public's eye as much as possible. I really hope that continues, because I'll tell you, this can't go on. There's innocent people that have been put behind bars for very little. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, all these people still remain free and able to abuse other people. I mean,
I know. And I've been through this for decades, Josh, and I'd like to say that I finally realized something's going to be done. But I've been through these gotcha moments most of my life, and they're bulletproof. So whether they will finally be brought to justice, I have my doubts. I'm hopeful and I'm prayerful that it will happen, but I just don't know.
Well, it's in the history books. You know, one last thing I wanted to get into with you, Juanita, is have you spoken with Donald Trump following the debate, pre-debate press conference?
No. I saw him and waved at him at the inauguration. I was standing right in front of him with Howie Carr and some of my other friends, and he acknowledged me. But as far as us speaking one-on-one, no, I haven't.
That must have been a big surprise to suddenly get a call from Donald Trump or his people saying, hey, can you come out to this press conference? We want to expose this story to the mainstream. Because they basically shanghaied the press in that room and forced them to have to report on this story.
Oh, isn't that the truth? I was coming home. I was in Washington, and I was on a plane returning to Arkansas at 5 o'clock in the evening, the day before the debate. And I get this call from the Trump people saying, would you come to the debate tomorrow night as our guest? Nothing was ever mentioned about a press conference. And I told them I'd have to think about it when I had a layover in Dallas and talk with my family and talk with the other ladies that had been invited. And we all decided it was the thing to do, Josh, because we've been told to shut up for decades. And here we were being invited to the most public forum possible to be seen with what we hoped was the next president of the United States. So it was awesome. But as far as the press conference, we didn't know that we were going to be in a press conference.
Well, I think it's done some great credit for getting your story forward and putting it to the mainstream. That's so important. We hope to help do the same. And of course, for those that have tuned in today, I want you all to check out You'd Better Put Some Ice on That, How I Survived Being Raped by Bill Clinton by Juanita Broaddrick on Amazon.com. This is a must read. Let's support this. Let's get this to the forefront of the news. This is a very important story. We see so much hypocrisy today with, all these people on the left saying we need to stop, all this sexual harassment of women, the Me Too movement, but then completely ignore the subject when it's on the other side of the spectrum or when it relates to something that benefits the other side of the spectrum. This is wrong. This needs to be exposed on full display for everyone, because this needs to be in the history books. When people think of Bill Clinton, they should think of a rapist. This isn't the only example. There are countless examples. I think conservatively about 80 plus women have technically in one way or another come out against Bill Clinton over the years. He's been on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express, I believe 6 to 12 times, where underage girls were brought on this plane. I mean, it's just disgusting. This needs to get out. Thank you so much for joining us again, Juanita. Let's keep pushing this. I hope people pick up your book. You'd better put some ice on that. And I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Hey, thank you so much, Josh.